Hey, this is Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC, and this is part one of our engine rebuilding series for the KTM 690 and Husky 701 engines. In this video, we're going to be focusing on removing the engine from the frame. To do this job, we're going to use several different common hand tools, including safety glasses and rags. But really, I want to focus on the specialty tools. So I'm going to show you our valve spring compressor, our circlip installer tool. This job is almost impossible without it. Ring compressor, wrist pin puller, and we're also using a hone. These are your top end tools. Now, some of them are going to be used for top and bottom end. So we have our blindside bearing puller, our bearing driver, and everybody's favorite tool, the sprocket jammer. We're also using a gear jammer, some precision measuring tools, and then these tools over here, these are going to be specifically for the bottom end. So we have the KTM race puller. You're going to use this along with a hot plate, a 2-jaw puller, and then we also have our flywheel puller and our primary drive gear puller. You're also going to want to use a flywheel holding tool and a crankcase splitter. Now, along with this, you're going to want to source some bolts. So these 4 bolts, we're going to use those along with the clutch, and they're 5 millimeters in diameter by 35 millimeters long with a 0.8 thread pitch. Now, everyone's part list will look a little bit different, but no matter what you need, whether it's a piston, connecting rod, some gaskets, bearings, seals, or O-rings, most of this stuff you'll find under the OEM diagram on our website. And then don't forget things like an oil change kit, your coolant, and then different types of cleaners, lubricants, definitely some moto seal, and we're also going to be using shims and some Loctite. The main focus for this rebuilding series will be for the 2008 to 2018 KTM 690 Enduro and Enduro R models, as well as the 2016 Husky 701, but it will help you get through the process on other bikes as well, including the 2007 to 2010 690 Supermoto and the 2008 to 2015 690 Duke. Now, these other bikes, there will be some differences during removal, and no matter what bike you're working on, you want to refer to your model-specific service manual throughout the process. Now, some common indicators of a bad bottom end would be a rod knock, or maybe your transmission is jumping out of gear, or you could be in this engine for other reasons. Maybe you're facing part failure, or just overall you have a lot of engine noise. Whatever the reason you're in this engine, you want to pay attention throughout the rebuild process and make sure you fix whatever is causing your problems. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. To begin the process, we're starting out with a clean bike, and this engine, it's going to come out from the bottom. So you need to support the bike in the upright position. For that, we're just using a wheel chock. And as you go through the process, it's really important to stay organized. That way everything is easy to reassemble. So we're using Ziploc bags and some masking tape to label everything. And we're also just going to be laying things out in order. Now, with all that being said, we can go ahead and remove our seat. The next step on most stock bikes, you're just going to remove a cover right here, but we have an aftermarket gas tank on ours. So whatever you have, you need to remove it. The next step is to remove the airbox. So we have a couple of bolts in each side that we need to remove. We'll also disconnect this electrical connector. We also have a hose clamp going to the throttle body. We need to loosen that up. To remove the bolts from the other side of the airbox, we need to remove the 2 bolts out of the reg rack and let it hang. And that gives us access to this front bolt. After that, I'm going to move this ECU out of the way, and we can lift up on the back of the airbox. We also want to remove this vent tube, and at this point you can remove the airbox. Next, we're going to disconnect the negative battery terminal. Now when you take the airbox off, if there's a ton of dirt under here, it's a good idea to get that cleaned out. So you'll cover your throttle body opening with a rag and then just use some water and maybe even a little bit of contact cleaner to remove most of that dirt. The next step is to remove the skid plate. Now we've raised our machine in the air to better show the process. You do not need a lift to do this job. Next, we need to drain the coolant and engine oil from this. So before I remove the drain plugs, I'm going to spray them off with some contact cleaner. First, we'll drain the coolant. This is going to be a 10mm socket. We'll remove this drain bolt. Then we can remove the radiator cap. Next, we'll clean our sealing surface for the drain plug and reinstall the plug using a new sealing washer. And we'll torque that down to 11.1 foot-pounds. Next, we'll drain the engine oil, and we're only going to remove one drain plug for that. We'll be cleaning the screens and oil filters in some later steps during the rebuild process. Once the oil is drained, we're going to reinstall the drain bolt. The next step is to remove our muffler. So to do that, we're going to remove this heat shield, and then we've got a clamp we need to loosen up underneath it. And if you have corrosion on this bolt, you can use some 6-in-1 on it. To get to the upper mounting bolt, I'm going to loosen and remove the 2 bolts on this cover. Now we can raise the cover up and remove this mounting bolt. And we'll remove the muffler. The next step is to cut the wire ties that are going to our O2 sensor, or that are holding that wiring down. So we'll cut that and disconnect the sensor. Now to remove the header, we'll remove these 2 bolts by the flange, and then we have one towards the back. All right, next we're going to temporarily place the reg rec back into place using the hardware. And then we need to remove this hose from the radiator. So I'm just going to use some big pliers to remove this clamp. Now for our gas tank, we already removed the bolt for this bracket, but if the bolt is still there on your bike, you're going to want to remove it now and do the same thing on the other side. We also have fuel lines coming up on both sides for our machine. Again, this is aftermarket, so we're going to go ahead and remove these. Now we'll remove this radiator hose on the other side. Next, we're going to remove this sprocket cover. So we got 2 bolts on that. All right, now to remove the sprocket, there's this tab that's bent over on the sprocket nut. So we need to bend that tab straight so we can remove it. So to remove this nut, what we're going to do is use our 27mm socket and apply our rear brake. We're also going to be using this sprocket jammer on there. You don't have to use this, it just makes it a little bit easier. So that's going to give me enough room to remove this sprocket. If you don't have enough chain slack to do that, you can loosen up the rear axle nut and move your adjusters up, remove the whole axle up until you have enough slack to take this off. Next step, we're going to remove the shifter. Next, we're going to cut the zip tie next to our hydraulic clutch line. And I'm actually going to spray this area off just so I don't get dirt down into the motor. We'll remove the remaining 2 bolts in our slave cylinder. Now I'm going to remove the O-ring, and I'm also going to remove this gasket. And then we'll remove the push rod. Now we're going to disconnect 3 connectors. So we have our crankshaft position sensor. We're going to disconnect that and move the wire out of the way. We have these stator wires. Disconnect those. And last, our gear position sensor. The next step is to loosen the hose clamp for the throttle body, and we're going to remove the throttle body and move it towards the rear of the bike. All right, the next step is to disconnect our positive and negative cables coming to the starter motor. Next, we have this brace that was supporting our gas tank, so we're going to remove that. This is our oil pressure sensor connector. We need to remove that. I'm going to label that. Now for the oil pressure sensor, I'm going to remove this bracket from the frame. All right, next step, we're going to remove this plastic cover. So I'm going to break this coil free and remove it. These can be stuck pretty good sometimes. And then this other one, I'm going to break it free, but you're not going to be able to remove it yet. So that's loosened up. We have 2 bolts holding this plastic retainer in place. Remove those and remove that retainer. So what I'm going to do is, this thing's held in by some O-rings, and first I'm just going to try to rock it up, and that way we can get the coil out. And then you can finish removing this retainer. Now just above the valve cover, we're going to disconnect both of these breather hoses. Before we start removing motor mounts or any mounting bolts, we're going to place a jack underneath the engine to help support it. Next step, we're going to remove these hangers from both sides. So to do that, we're going to start at the bottom. This other side, it's an 8mm Allen key we're holding this with. And the side closest to us is a 13mm socket. Next, we'll use a T45 to remove the 2 upper bolts. All right, the next step is to remove the mounting bolts on both sides of the frame at the very bottom. So I've got a helper on the other side. We're going to loosen that up. So after that, we need to remove this upper bolt as well as these 2 lower ones so we can move this foot peg out just a little further. So I'm just going to move that bracket out of the way, and the swing arm pivot, we're going to hit it through, not all the way. One side in the swing arm is going to stay in, but we'll just push it through until it's released from the motor. Then we can lower the engine. All right, now that we've lowered the motor, we're gonna plug up all the openings and then take it out to our pressure washer. We'll degrease it and wash this off. After we've done that, we'll bring it to the workbench. Now that I have the engine cleaned up, I've gone ahead and put it on the engine stand, and we're gonna start tearing this thing apart. Follow us over to part 2 of our engine rebuild series for the KTM 690 and Husky 701 to know how to do that. And if you need any parts for this engine, check out our website. We have a lot of different options on there. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. And for more helpful content like this, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.